All right. All right. So we're continuing our study of Jesus, his ministry, and his apostles, as recorded in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And last week we finally finished the calling. I always forget this microphone. Last week we finally finished the calling of the disciples named by Jesus, and Matthew was the last to be called to follow Jesus as a disciple. And to review, as we do each week, who was Matthew that Jesus called? Tax collector, son of Alphaeus, and that's right, he's also called Levi. And whose account's called Matthew Levi? I think I briefly discussed that last week. Mark and Luke. But Matthew calls himself Matthew in the calling of him to be a disciple. And as Jesus called him to be a disciple, where did Jesus see this man, Matthew? In the tax office, the tax booth. And when Jesus come across him, where was he coming from? I think we went over that. Well, he was in Capernaum, and he had entered the house of the and this is where he healed the paralytic. So Jesus left there, and he was coming from there, and he seen Matthew at the tax office. And when Jesus come to Matthew, what did he say to Matthew?
Follow me.
Follow me. As he did all the other disciples that he called. And did he follow Jesus?
Yes.
Right away, he arose and he followed Jesus, leaving everything. And it's not recorded. No one ever rejected Jesus' calling to follow him. And after Jesus came to Matthew's house, why was Jesus, after this, he came to Matthew's house after he called him to follow him, and why was Jesus at the tax collector Matthew's house? Right, so Matthew had prepared a feast, a great feast, and there were many that were there, and who were all at the feast here with Jesus and Matthew? Many tax collectors, sinners, and who else? His disciples. His disciples were there with him. And then, as Terry alluded, the scribes and the Pharisees were near, and they seen Jesus dining with the tax collector. And they approached Jesus' disciples. And what did they ask Jesus' disciples?
Why would he be dining with the tax collector?
Right. Why are you dining? Why are you eating? Why is your teacher eating and drinking with the tax collectors and the sinners? But Jesus overheard them questioning his disciples, and he intervened. And what did he say to those scribes and Pharisees?
As the sick need a physician,
Those who
tax collectors need a physician because they are the sinners and sick,
right.
not those that are already saved.
So those that are well or have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. And Jesus goes on and to tell them to go and learn what? tells them that I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And Jesus called these 7 men to be his disciples. And we have covered the encounters that they had with Jesus. And let's go over again who were these 7 men that were called to follow him. Do you remember? James, John,
Andrew.
Peter, Philip, Nathaniel,
right,
Matthew.
and Matthew, right. So Andrew and his brother Simon, who is called Peter, Philip, who is from Bethsaida, and his friend Nathaniel, who is also known as Bartholomew, and the Israelite in whom there was no guile, and James the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, and then Matthew or Levi here, the tax collector. Now after this, Jesus had continued to preach, and he continued to teach, and he had gained many more disciples, and it was time for Jesus to train some of these more intimately to spread the gospel, because he knew that his time on earth was coming and nearing an end. So Jesus calls his disciples, and he chooses 12 to be his apostles. So we're going to begin our lesson by reading our text, starting in Matthew 10, 1 through 4. And we'll just start over here with John.
And when he had called to him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. And the names of the 12 apostles are these: the first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother.
Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the publican, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed.
All right. So then let's go to Mark 3, 13 to 21.
And then he went up on the mountain and called to him those he himself wanted. And they came to him. Then he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach.
And to have power to heal sickness and to cast out demons. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Barnabas, that is, sons of thunder.
And Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon Canaanite and Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him. And they went into the house, and the multitude come together again, so that they could not as much eat bread.
All right. So now let's go to Luke 6, 12 to 16.
Now when it came to pass in those days that he went to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from there he rose, and he chose the 12, whom he also named the apostles.
Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot,
And Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which also was the traitor.
Okay, so in these texts, this is where Jesus is calling his apostles from the the 12 apostles from the disciples that were following him. And Luke records that he went to a mountain and prayed. And how long was he there praying?
All
Right. So Jesus is there praying all night. And when he called his disciples to him, when was that?
First thing in the morning.
Right. So it was after he prayed all night and first thing the next morning when it was day. From these disciples, he chose many to be his apostles. And how many did he choose out of the disciples that were following him?
12.
So 12 disciples. And who was called first in our text?
Simon.
So Simon Peter is called first. And if you remember, back when the disciples began to follow Jesus, when he was calling them to follow me, who was it that he called first? So yes, Andrew, and John was there with him. So after naming the 12 apostles, what did Matthew record that Jesus gave them?
Power to heal and
Yes, the demons.
Yep. So, Jesus gave them power over unclean spirits, to cast out those spirits, and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. And then Mark records the reason Jesus appointed the 12. So why did Jesus appoint the 12?
Spread the gospel.
Right. So in Mark's account, he says that he called them that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have power to heal sickness and diseases and to cast out demons. And that's in Mark 3:15 and 14 and 15. So let's go over the names of the 12 that he's called. I'll try to use the board tonight. Get this out of the way. Hopefully everybody can see. I'll try to stand out of the way. So in Matthew, who is the 12? And what is the order that he calls the apostles here? So we'll write Matthew here. This is Matthew's account. So he calls Peter, then Andrew, James, then John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus,
Simon and Judas.
Simon, and then Judas Iscariot, right. So let's go to Mark. And, what's the order of the apostles called here? Simon,
Peter. And then Simon and James.
James, John, the brother of James, Andrew,
Philip,
Philip,
Bartholomew,
Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus,
Simon and Judas Iscariot.
Simon, and Judas. Sorry, it was kind of messy. All right. Luke. Started out with Simon, right? Then Andrew,
James and John.
James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Simon, Judas, and then Judas Iscariot. So we can note that the lists are a little bit different. In order that he called by Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account. And we can also notice that some names were different between the three Gospels here. So Peter, Simon, and Simon here, all in line to be first called. And then Matthew says Andrew, but Andrew is down here in the fourth place in Mark's account. But back up to second in Luke's account. And then James, the son of Zebedee, changes order also. And then John, his brother, and then Philip. So Philip, make my line a little better. Philip, and then Philip, and then Bartholomew, and then Matthew records Thomas instead of Matthew, as Mark says Matthew is next, and then Luke is the same as Mark. And then Matthew's account, Mark is here like this. Matthew, not Mark. I don't know why I said Mark. All right, then James, the son of Alphaeus, then Simon, Thaddeus,
He had 4 names, didn't
yes, Labatius, Thaddeus, what was the other?
he?
Judas. And that's where this is.
That's what it is, okay.
So this goes down to Judas here. That's why, looks like a discrepancy, but that was his name also. So Judas, Thaddeus, And I think, Matthew, was it Levacious?
Yeah. Like,
Okay, so I need to write that on there probably. So.
His brother James.
All right, and then Simon, and then Judas Iscariot. Okay. So I wrote all this on here so we can have a better view of the 12 apostles. Can y'all see that? Oh. Maybe y'all can see through me. I don't know. All right, so Peter, Simon, called Peter. He was the first to be called. And try to make it a little colorful here. I kind of alluded to this before in an earlier lesson, that there was three groups of four. So Peter, Andrew, James, and John in Matthew here. And then Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Get a little bit more noticeable maybe. And then Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, and Matthew is one group. And they're listed in different orders, but the same four are in the same groups in all three accounts. All right? So there's three groups of four apostles. And then Simon being the head of all 12, he was also the head of his group. So, and that's for, that's the blue here, for Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay, now Philip, he was the head of his group. And then James was the head of his group. And then Judas Iscariot is always last because he betrayed Jesus, right? So it gives you a little bit of an idea how each account groups the apostles. And this top group was more intimate with Jesus, and we can read that in Scripture. Peter always being the first. He was the first called, and then James and John was a lot more intimate, more than Andrew. So Andrew is still part of the group that is close relation to Jesus, but in Scripture there's some verses, there's events that Jesus was directly involved with Peter, James, and John, and Andrew was kind of not there for some of those things. So that just gives you a little visual of the 12 apostles and how that they were grouped together and how they were called in each of the Gospels. All right? So what was an apostle? Right? So, an apostle is a messenger of the teachings of Jesus. He is one that has accompanied him from day that John the Baptist baptized him in the Jordan, and that they were with him as until he was taken up in the ascension, and they also witnessed his resurrection. So, an apostle was a messenger sent out, and what were the requirements to be called an apostle? Let's read Acts 1, 12 through 26. And we'll just, whoever's next. Acts 1, 12 through 26.
Acts 12, 1 through 26.
Acts 1,
Oh, okay.
12 through 26. I might have said 12, I'm sorry.
The form of treatise have I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began both to do and teach, unto the day in which he was taken up. After that he, through the Holy Ghost, had given commandments unto the apostles whom he had chosen.
Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey. And when they had entered, they went up into the upper room where they were staying. Peter, James, John, and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James.
All right, so 14, next.
These all continued one accord in prayer and supplication with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, was present.
Yep, that's right.
And in those days, Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples and said, the number of names together were about 120.
Many wilderness scriptures and things have been fulfilled, which the Holy Ghost by mouth of David spake before concerning Judas, which was God him that put Jesus. For he was numbered with us, and he had obtained part of his ministry.
Now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, with all his entrails gushed out. And it became known to all those dwelling in Jerusalem, so that the field is called in their own language, Akil Dama, that is, field of blood.
For it is written in the book of Psalms, let his dwelling place be desolate, and let no one live in it. Let another take his office. Therefore, these men who have accompanied us all of the time that the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John to that day when he was taken up from us, one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection.
How far you can go?
26.
And they put forward two, Joseph called Barsabas, who was also called Justus, and Matthias, and they prayed and said, you, Lord, who know the hearts of all, show which one of these you have chosen to take place in his ministry and apostleship, from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles.
Okay, so here, the apostles are in the upper room with other disciples, and they are choosing a replacement for Judas, because Judas Iscariot had betrayed Jesus, and he betrayed him by guiding those to whom Jesus, who took Jesus to be crucified on the cross. And then he goes on and commits suicide, leaving the 11. And after Jesus' ascension to heaven, the remaining 11 gathered to fulfill prophecy and to choose a replacement for Judas Iscariot. So what were the requirements to be called an apostle? Right, so they had to be accompanied with the others from the time that the Lord had went in and out among them, beginning from the time that Jesus was baptized by John unto the ascension in heaven. And they must have seen his resurrection. So here in Acts, Luke describes the apostles grouped in by twos, it seems, in Acts 1:13. And it seems that Peter and John were grouped together, James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, and then James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James, which is also Thaddeus. And Judas Iscariot is not mentioned because he was dead, and they were replacing him by Matthias. So our next lesson will be Jesus sending out the apostles. So let's go to our questions. It's not a page number unless you marked them, and I don't know what page number that would be because I didn't mark mine. So it just, what is it?
Oh, never mind.
8, 6?
8 or 6.
Okay.
6 or 8.
6 or 8, or 86, or 68, or 8. The title is Jesus Apostles. And it's our scriptures, Matthew 10, 1 through 4, Mark 3, 13, 21, and Luke 6, 12 through 16. All right, so let's begin with number 1. I think we're over here with Johnny. Thank you. Should say Jesus Apostles at the top.
What is?
Sorry, it's all confusing.
That may just be me. I'm running out of paper. There it is.
Oh, you got it, okay.
Jesus apostles. Jesus went to a mountain to pray and continued all night in his prayer.
Okay, so Jesus went to a mountain to pray, and he continued all night in prayer to God. So who went with him on the mountain? Nobody, right? Yep, that's a trick question. All right, so number 2, I'm sure you didn't find the answer to this. If you did, I would love to see your answer.
I was gonna ask you where that was.
I told you, we'll learn tonight.
Well,
Right.
I just read it in Acts.
Right, we read it in Acts, and that's where that question comes from.
Well, why didn't you put Acts?
I had Acts.
Come on now.
Well, we just read it, so
We
But
didn't
I-
know to read it.
I know. Originally, I had it up with the scriptures, and then I decided to take it away. So this is a.
I'm not the only crazy.
Well, no, we searched everywhere.
I got it.
You got the answer. All right. All right, Tony.
But I Googled it.
Poetic license on the part of the question writer.
The mountain was called Olivet, which is a Sabbath day journey from Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, that's right. So,
It's hard to read that in 2 books, one of them blank.
and my questions may be kind of blocked out. I noticed one of them down here, well, actually more than one, that's kind of blocked out. So hopefully you can read between the lines. So this is in Acts, chapter 1, where the mountain was called Olivet, and it was a Sabbath day journey from Jerusalem. All right, number 3.
When morning came, Jesus called to him his disciples, and of them he chose 12.
Right. So he called his disciples, and of them he chose his 12 apostles. And then, like I mentioned, in these 3 accounts, they're in different orders, but it's all the same guys here. All right, number 4.
4 is just that he called them apostles,
Right.
of those he chose.
So of those of them that he chose, he called them apostles. All right. Number 5.
Simon was sure named Peter, it's true.
That's right.
Is it? I mean,
Is that how we go to first question?
Oh,
he,
yeah,
It says Simon who was called Peter.
Who was called
It doesn't
Peter.
say- You're right, it doesn't really say his name.
Jesus named him that,
right,
but that wasn't his family name.
that wasn't, his surname, so.
I put, oh, I mean, I guess that's how you look at it.
It depends on how you
Give
look
me
at
the
it.
hard one, Danny.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
This is a good way to learn it, though.
All right,
I'm just playing.
number 6.
James and John were the sons of Alphaeus. I have all.
Right, so who were they, the sons of
Zebedee.
Zebedee? All right,
That was James.
But there was James, son of
James,
Alphaeus.
the son of.
there was,
Not James and John, the brothers.
right, so the question is referring to James and John, the brothers, and
It's Tom.
that's false, because they were the sons of Zebedee and not Alphaeus. All right, we're gonna get more interesting and a question on down.
Yeah,
So-
Is it blank?
Yeah, so number 7, I think we're on, yeah.
Simon was also called Zealot,
So, yeah, Zelotes.
Zelotes, oh, I couldn't spell it.
So
Z-O-
that may be in different versions.
Zealot is what mine
Zealot is what yours says. What do you have, King James?
is.
Mine says
Anyway, true
So-
or false? True.
I gotta check
Yes.
it.
Right. So it's true. All right. Number 8.
Judas, the brother of James, is also known as Thaddeus. I've got false.
Right. So Judas, the brother of James, is not known as Thaddeus, right?
James, no.
Right. So is, all right. The next question, I guess, will be mine.
I was confused on
Yeah, I was confused too.
Well, it says Judas, son of James, and that one threw me, cause I did with brother.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're talking about number 8. Yeah. Okay. So number 9, I'm gonna answer number 9. So the question is, Judas not, and if you can't read it, that's what it's supposed to say, Judas not Iscariot, and James were
None of the above.
who? Right. That's not an option, but it is none of the above because he is none of these.
I just tried today.
So who was Judas not Iscariot?
That's Simon.
Thaddeus.
I'll get my board up here.
Thaddeus.
Thaddeus and Levius
So this will be a good review, So Judas is listed in Luke's account, but it is Thaddeus or Lebatius in Matthew, so, because you have Judas Iscariot and Judas in Luke. Okay, so Judas not Iscariot, and that, I believe in one text in the Bible is,
That is in
John
John 14.
14:22. Vicky has it already. So that's where he is. Thaddeus is named Judas, not Iscariot. So who was Thaddeus the son of? And I guess what we need to do, we kind of neglected our chart. So let's see where I'm at here. I need to add Matthew. And then I'll have enough space for others. So we'll just put Thaddeus. Judas.
Thaddeus was, he was the son of James, right?
Right, so Thaddeus or Judas or Lebatius was the son of James. Right. So let's go through A, B, C, and D here. So who were the sons of thunder? James and John. And this James and John is who? Who are we talking about?
Apostles.
Right. And they were sons of
Zebedee.
Zebedee. Right. And John wrote the book of John, right? So we're talking about, make sure we're talking about the same person. All right, so B is the sons of Zebedee, and that is also James and John. And then the next one is the sons of Alphaeus.
Matthew was and James was, but they weren't necessarily.
Right, so
the same
James-
one.
So James the Less is the son of Alphaeus, and then Matthew was also called the son of Alphaeus. Now, whether that was the same Alphaeus, we don't know, but we do know that they were sons of Alphaeus. All right. So who are the sons of Boanerges?
That was James and John were called.
Right. So that's what James and John were called, and the meaning of that is sons of thunder. Right. All right. The last thing I want to mention on that was James, the son of Alphaeus. We mentioned Matthew was named the son of Alphaeus, and James, the son of Alphaeus. And who is this James? James the Less, right. So it's not the brother John, which is the son of Zebedee. So it's a different James. So now that you're all confused of all these names, let's do number 10. Where do we get to? I don't know. Scott? Is it Scott's turn? Oh, all right. Oh, okay.
James and John were named, Boanerges and Son of Thunder. A and B is what I thought.
And see.
A and B and C. Oh, that's supposed to say apostles, so James and John were named Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, and they were apostles. All right. Any questions or comments? Hopefully next week we'll, I'll try to have the lesson, huh? No, probably not. It does kind of get confusing, all these,
You said the lesson.
So when James next on the list after James,
on this list, I listed Judas, but I just wrote that on there, because I was gonna fill that out, but now I've noticed that I don't have enough spaces, so I'm gonna have to redo all of that, so.
You need to let them know that you're gonna print it off the next lesson.
Yeah, I did. I don't have the next lesson printed off, and I'll try to bring it Sunday. Hopefully I'll